the Teaching Tax Flow podcast, where the goal is to empower and educate you to legally and ethically minimize taxes paid over your lifetime.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, episode 77. We are going to look at those STR loopholes, but a little bit of information for you. You are only a couple weeks away from that tax deadline, or as some refer to as tax day. However, go back to episode 25 we did here, and about a year ago, almost to the date, check it out, the value of a tax extension. But before we jump into today's topic, let's take a brief moment as always and thank our episode sponsor.
This podcast is sponsored by The Mortgage Shop. Are you looking to qualify for an investment credit loan without jumping through hoops? That's easy. They have loans with LTV up to 89.99%. Exploring their products and discovering how they can work for you is simple. Just visit mortgage.shop or call 865-325-2566 and tell them TTF sent you.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Teaching Tax Flow podcast. As you've seen in the title, the show notes, etc., and in the intro that you just heard, today we are going to talk about the STR loophole. So, acronyms you know we love in the Teaching Tax Flow world. I mean, heck, the IRS has one, Internal Revenue Service. They go by IRS. Naturally, we love our acronyms. STR, short-term rental. So STR loopholes. Today, we are going to explain those and what they are, what they aren't, and we got a great guest. But before we introduce him, Chris Picuro, you know what I'm going to say. Welcome back to your own show. How's it going?
Thank you for welcoming back to our show, Johnny T. I appreciate it. Very excited about our guest today. And we have had a ton of people in the Teaching Tax Flow community. And actually, I believe any of our content on short-term rental tax strategy or loophole is in our top 3 of consumption. So we knew we've been wanting to do this topic for 6 months, but we wanted to wait till we had a guest that not only lives and breathes in this space, but also can give our listeners some practical tips towards the end of the podcast on what to do next. And this is a strategy that we've used personally, and it's really exciting. And ultimately, it allows taxpayers that invest in qualified short-term rental properties to utilize cost segregation studies and potentially offset W-2 wages or retirement income or any type of other income and navigate around the passive activity rules. But Arda is going to explain that to you as well. And yeah, we're very excited to have Arda Bircan join us. Arda, welcome to the show. And can you give us a little bit of history about yourself and how you found yourself operating and running and co-hosting short-term rental property?
Thanks for the kind introduction and great to be with you guys today. I'm a real estate investor. I also built a short-term rental business from scratch in South Florida. Back in 2020, I own a real estate consulting firm named Short-Term Rental Loophole. The main reason I got into short-term rental business and launched my own, consulting practice is because short-term rental properties are a great investment for high-income earners. They deliver strong cash-on-cash returns, and the underlying asset often appreciates. To give you an idea, my first short-term rental in South Florida generated $210K revenue, and the net income was about $63,000 in the first year of operation. Obviously those, kind of numbers were impressive. That's exactly the cash flow, that I wanted to, kind of get from the, the first property. So, but in addition to that, short-term rentals are also offered, those with high W-2 income and massive opportunity to reduce their tax burden.
And I'm going to touch on what makes a property a short-term rentals, according to the IRS, because typically rental properties, like I said, are passive investments, and they are considered, so you have the passive activity loss rules that you tangle with, meaning if you have losses from rental properties. Now, we know in teaching tax flow, one of the laws is that cash flow doesn't equal tax flow. So you could very well have a rental property that is a positive cash flow, putting money in your pocket, but on your tax return shows a loss. And that loss is due to the depreciation deduction. And that depreciation deduction can be fueled by using bonus depreciation, which is further fueled by using a cost segregation study. So let's say you have a rental property that's putting cash in your pocket, but you put a lot of money into it to start up. You got some furniture, fixtures, you bought it, maybe even bought it turnkey, and you have a large depreciation deduction. Well, in order to avoid, I should say, and legally and ethically avoid the passive activity rules, if the property is considered a short-term rental property, then it's considered a commercial operation, if you will. So what makes a short-term rental property? Well, there's a few different components. The first component is going to be the average length of stay of the tenant. So if the average length of stay of the tenant is 7 days or less, you're typically going to have a short-term rental property. Or if the average stay is 30 days or less and you are providing substantial services, that's a very, very rare. Think about that situation would be as if you owned a property, or let's say you owned a big lot and you have 4 cabins on it and you live in the 5th cabin and you're the one changing the sheets, preparing the meals, extremely, extremely hands-on with the guests. So typically it's going to be that 7 days or less. There are some rules as far as how many days you can stay in there personally. It's got to be 14 days or less, or less than 10% of the use days. But typically you're talking about a vacation rental. And you also have to have something called material participation. And this is very important. So to obtain material participation, and we have some resources as far as how to track these hours, there are 7 different tests. The easiest test and the most likely test you're going to pass when you're dealing with a short-term rental property is the 100-hour rule. What the 100-hour rule says is that you've put in at least 100 hours of time into operating that short-term rental property, and you have more time than anyone else on that property. So in general, if you're listening to this and you own a short-term rental property, you're considering it, and you self-manage it, and you're putting the posts on Airbnb, VRBO, or use software like Hospitable or any of these softwares that manage your reservations and your client communications, then you're most likely meeting that material participation threshold. So if you meet that material participation, you have a short-term rental property, thus the loophole, and then you could potentially show a large loss from that rental property with the cost segregation study and offset, as Arda said, high W-2 wages. So let's say you have a couple and one spouse says that $900,000 of W-2 wages, the other one is a homemaker but runs the Airbnb property, and it could be remotely run. You could potentially have hundreds of thousands of dollars of losses from that short-term rental property and offset the W-2 wages. So hopefully I explained it in a fashion that's kind of digestible.
And Chris, really quick too, before we go too far on, so me being, not the tax guy, the voice of the average Joe, right? So just to clarify, right, we're talking about some of the short-term rental loophole. So to some people, and I know we mentioned this maybe like a dozen or so episodes back and clarified there too. When we talk about loophole, we're not saying like, oh, this is hey, I gotcha, Uncle Sam, and doing anything unethical. This is basically just navigating our way through the tax quote-unquote system. Is that correct, or am I totally off on that one?
Like an excellent explanation, I believe. But very basically, the short-term rental loophole refers to a section of the tax code that says if the average customer stay at a short-term rental for 7 days or less, then your short-term rental is not a rental activity for the purpose of the tax code. It's treated as any other business. Ultimately, that means, like Chris explained very well, all you need to do is materially participate in that business for the losses to be non-passive and offset your W-2 income.
Absolutely. So now we've defined that. Arda, I want to pick your brain because this is your wheelhouse. For someone listening to this, what are the things, and feel free to mention certain markets, but what are the things people should look for when selecting? I'm going to first start with a market and then start with a property, because you are very good in analyzing that what we call COC, cash on cash, CNC, cash on cash return. There's properties by the beach and theme parks and mountain, and there's condos and 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms. So first, what type of, and there's some where they're more seasonal. So what type of market are we looking for typically? In you might say, well, it depends on the price point, right? And then what type of property are you seeing that are getting the best returns?
This is a great question. And, again, investing in short-term rentals can be an incredibly effective way to save money on your taxes. And buying a short-term rental and expanding your earning potential by accumulating additional properties, a game plan used by high net worth individuals nationwide, right? But when we talk about, the cash-on-cash returns, ROIs, the number that I really focus on, at least I would like to see a 15, or 20% cash-on-cash return. And I strongly recommend, purchasing a single-family home, a larger property, preferably, at least preferably, in a 5-bedroom, due to the fact that you can generate more revenue from that particular, property compared to a 2 or 3 bedroom. Because when I look at the, the short-term rental markets, usually every single market nowadays is saturated, right? But when you talk about, on a larger properties, 5-bedroom, or 6-bedroom, the competition is much less. So it would give you the, the opportunity to charge, more average daily rates, which would increase your gross revenue if you look at it from an, an annual perspective.
That's a great point, and I've heard that quite a bit. Where you're buying a studio, buying a 1-bedroom, buying a 2-bedroom unit, is a good entry point potentially cost-wise. But you're also then competing against hotel rooms. You're competing against even a room at a residence inn that's a 2-bedroom. So 4 or 5 bedrooms are going to be better for a bigger party. So what market? So I do like that, and I guess it depends. There's certain markets that don't have a lot of big chain hotels. So what markets are you seeing? What should someone look for in a market? Should someone that's going to self-manage their property be concerned about being able to drive to the property, or is distance an issue, or is it something more picking the right market?
It really boils down to, determining the budget. You'll need to know how much money, you can work with and what price range you'll be looking in. And that will impact the type of property you can search for and the area you will be looking in. I always tell, an investors, establishing a budget up front will save many headaches in the long run and get you aligned with your goals. But to answer your question, I do like, certain markets. One of them is North Carolina, especially Asheville area, because I've been seeing, really good, cash-on-cash returns, ROIs, in that particular market. And we've been, chasing deals actively, in the Asheville area. But obviously, location. Again, when I look at, the Asheville market, the proximity or the distance between the downtown Asheville and your property, would be the determining factor, because it's going to affect your, the rates, you can charge on a daily basis. Besides, on a North Carolina, Asheville, Montana, and Maine, those markets are not very saturated, and we were able to find actually very nice, properties, large, single family homes, in those markets.
There, you've got different markets, right? So some markets, I'm going to give you the middle, Orlando market seems to be, the occupancy rates are super high, but revenue per night's low. So obviously something to consider, and we considered as well, is that, don't be so focused on occupancy percentage, because that just means there's a lot more foot traffic, right? Focus on your revenue and your average nightly, revenue, which the next question is going to kind of tie into that is, what amenities are you seeing are most in demand in are most properties that perform well? Is theming, in your opinion, the property of value to a potential buyer?
Great question. So, obviously, if you are talking about Orlando, I would say you definitely need a pool. In addition to that, I would say you would need a pool heater, because during the the winter months, that's what we call the high season in Florida. If you are catering to high-end customers, the temperatures drop during January, February, March. You need to be able to offer that a nice amenity. a private pool as well as, like a pool heater. But in addition to that, I've been seeing, especially in Asheville, North Carolina market, a TV room. And when I say a TV room, a luxury, like on a TV room with big chairs, big, like on a screen, a nice, like outdoor patio with a fire pit, because it creates, that amazing, like an ambience. Due to the, like the global warming, I would say, it doesn't get that cold right now. Like we are in March, right? I'm in Nashville, but I was in North Carolina about 2 weeks ago, and it was a lovely day. And after 5, 6 p.m., if you have them, like the heaters, like an outdoor heaters, then you can definitely, like an hang out outside, and like you can watch, like the beautiful views. But so those are, like the amenities, like that come to my mind. But if you are looking at a property in, Maine or Montana, definitely a hot tub, like kind of would be a great, like amenity.
No, I agree that it really just depends on, some type of pool or hot tub is going to be nice, because if someone's renting a home, they want that privacy to have their own pool instead of using a hotel pool, if you will. So, and that's really important. Let's talk about the owner side. In your opinion, what are some of the relationships locally that are important to establish? Obviously, people are concerned about cleaners and handymen and the operation. Let's say you're managing the property remotely. What are some of those key relationships that owners should, or potential owners should consider?
Yeah, I would say that the single most important, like a relationship that you would need to build as a, like a short-term rental investor is finding, like the top-notch cleaners. Because just imagine if it's like a luxury property, you checked into the property, and if it's not, like extremely clean, or if it doesn't feel clean, then it's going to create, like a tremendous amount of discomfort for, like your guests. That's not something that you want to run into. So I strongly, like, recommend. I'm not a big fan of actually leveraging, cleaning companies. What we did inside Florida, we really focused on, like the local neighborhood cleaners, and like we negotiated, like different deals with them. Obviously, whenever like they delivered, like the services that we were looking for, we tipped them well and we leveraged their services more. But from my point of view, definitely you need to have multiple different, like cleaning crews, due to the fact that anything could happen. Like they may get sick, they may, like need to run, like their situation kind of be different, right? They may, like overcommit or whatever the reason is. So you need to have a backup plan, right? That's the one thing. The second, like most important relationship that you need to have as a, like a short-term rental investor in the local market that you're operating is the handyman. And what I did, like inside Florida, literally knock on, like my neighbors' doors and ask them, like handyman recommendations, because like you could use Google, you could use Yelp, but nowadays, like everybody talks great about, like on everybody's services. Then, like the neighbor tells me he's been, like leveraging a certain handyman, and like he's on time, he does a good job, he's reliable. That's like the handyman that I want to work with. So that's how, like I was able to build, like strong relationships, and, like that's how I built, like team. And obviously we replicate, like the same thing in other markets. And that's how, like we delivering like a certain customer experience. That's what it really boils down to on Airbnb or VRBO. That's how you need to differentiate yourself from them other, like operators.
Yeah, having the handyman and having the cleaners is huge. And, something that even though I'm in this world somewhat on my own, having a redundancy is really important. Just think, like you said, we're all human, so we are unreliable. Even if we want to be reliable, we're just unreliable. Anything could happen.
Yeah, exactly. And over the weekends, like you would need some help, right? Like it could be Sunday, it could be, like on a Saturday. And the same thing, like something could break down. You need to have that, like a support system, like in place. And the best way to, develop those relationships is basically leveraging other people's relationships in the neighborhood. And as long as you're a good neighbor, like you're not going to have any problems getting those, like the referrals from the other folks, based on my experience.
And Arda, I actually have a question for you too. So we you talked a little bit about, or actually, Chris, I think you had mentioned it too, right? Like, obviously it takes cash to invest. Well, not necessarily, but you obviously need resources to invest. In your experience, kind of aligning or finding those investors in a sense who are willing and knowledgeable enough to invest in short-term rentals, have a lot of the people and individuals that you've talked to, families, et cetera, are they even aware that short-term rentals really are a great investment on their side? And then to follow that up too, so obviously are a lot of them aware of it, but then also in conversations with them, what are some of the concerns they might have? Is it I completely want to be hands off. This sounds like it's too much work for me. So maybe walk us through that a little bit for our listeners that, maybe have been looking for something like this, but never truly looked at it as an opportunity that they could take advantage of.
Based on my experience, most of the investors do not have the expertise to analyze markets and deals properly. And I'm not trying to be harsh, but like I have to kind of point that out. They also don't know how to buy a short-term rental property the right way. And also what I've been seeing, most of them lack an understanding of the tax code. From my point of view, finding the highest profitable short-term rental property and then buying it the right way, using it for non-passive losses and leveraging, advanced tax strategies are not straightforward issues. And these are often, huge amounts of money at stake. So it makes people, kind of very nervous, right? Including myself. So what I can tell, it really requires the help of a team. I would say it's specifically a real estate CPA and a short-term rental, investment expert.
It's funny, here I am in the middle. So we got a great CPA and a STR expert right here on the show. So no, this is great.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've loved real estate since I was 5 years old playing Monopoly. So wherever I go, I'm always interested in the market, even if I'm not really going to purchase a property there. It fascinates me, and then I'm always thinking like, okay, well, and I think a lot of times what happens with people that aren't, working with a professional, and realize that there are people like Arda out there that can help them analyze the property, because a lot of times what I see from my perspective is I like going to the Smoky Mountains, I like going to Orlando or the beach, in a family. Well, we're going twice a year, we're paying all this money to stay there, and then they start looking around. Oh, maybe we should buy something, and they're kind of influenced by their heart more than their head a little bit when they're buying the property. So before John wraps us up here, Arda, can you kind of talk about what are some of the things that you do, and we're going to leave that information in our show notes. But what are some of the things you do, because you work specifically with investors on market selection and property selection? So what are some of the things that you help them understand and maybe go beyond the emotional part of the property and location?
This is the, the $1 million question, right? Very, kind of briefly, being successful in real estate investing largely comes down to the property that is chosen. And a successful investment property is the one that provides the highest ROI for the longest period of time and appreciates in value. We basically, me and my team, we handle all aspects of finding the most profitable short-term rental investment property, from deep market research, lending you the highest profitable property, teaching you furnishing and managing your property. So that's what, we do, and that's what we are really good at.
So Arda, this is one that's pretty I shouldn't say time sensitive, but time relevant. Obviously we'll use Airbnb for an example. So anybody that follows the short-term rental market obviously has heard about significant changes through Airbnb. So again, Airbnb is just one piece of it, right? So looking at New York, and we don't have to get into the political and too much of the regulations of it, but in turn, maybe talking about how you help navigate through some of those. So looking at New York City, for example, there was a giant blow to the short-term rental market when they basically came in and, theoretically swung a hammer and wiped it out. So do you find yourself, actually, I'm going to answer my own question, but then I'm going to ask you another one. So I know for a fact that you help them navigate those markets. So for example, if you have somebody say, I'm say I live in Michigan. I really love going to New York City. I looked at it as a dream of owning a short-term rental there. You say, hey, John, you know what? It's probably not a good idea right now, based on et cetera, et cetera. So that's a huge part of what you do, correct, is really helping guide them through, navigating those, because more and more markets are getting regulations. Some help, some hinder, right, on investing.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's talk about, just to give you, a specific example, let's talk about Asheville really quick, right? Like, you cannot run a short-term rental within the city limits of Asheville. And, I run into investors, they're looking at, on certain properties in Asheville. And when I tell them, if you were to, buy this property, there's going to be a 30-day minimum on this particular home that you are looking at. Oh, we didn't know that. So you really need to, pick up the phone and call the, this city and ask them and get in touch with the right department, the short-term rental department, have a conversation with them on the phone and get their email address and send them, a follow-up email and, give them the address and get approvals, because email is like a written approval nowadays. And that's what we do, for instance, for our clients, because honestly, I run into, so many, investors, they, told me that they talked to the real estate agent and they were told that they can legally operate a short-term rental in a particular market, and it turned out that wasn't the case. So, when I tell them, obviously, if you leverage our services, that's something, we look into, for every single, investor, and it's a, a huge deal. But if you are doing it, on your own, you must, pick up the phone, call, the city and verify the information and give them, the physical address and ask them, basically, can it be a short-term rental? I'm looking to, rent this property on Airbnb or VRV or less than 7 days. Would that be okay? And based on my experience, because we've been looking at, so many different markets, talking to, city officials, I never run into a situation where it took more than 24 hours to get a straight answer from them, the city. That would be, my suggestion or recommendation for, the real estate investors.
And really the value of working with somebody like yourself, right? Like I'm thinking of here, even, the smaller town that I live in here, there's regulations in place that if you were to call the city office, well, not here specifically, but if you call a city office, you may get a response from the city and the thumbs up. However, you might be in a neighborhood, HOAs, POAs, et cetera, that say absolutely not, right? So that's where, your knowledge not only, and I'm speaking for you a little bit, but I'm going to make the assumption, your knowledge as far as for not just knowing the answer, but knowing how to get the answer and who to talk to and really how to navigate it is huge. So on that note, I don't want to cut anybody off. However, I know we can talk on this forever. So Chris, do you have anything else you wanted to ask Arda here before we skip along? Because I know we're going to have to do another show on this one for sure, because I have all kinds of questions.
Right, absolutely. I want to thank him for coming on the show. And, if you're listening to this, you either own a short-term rental property or you're deeply considering it, please reach out to us and we can help guide you in the right direction, and you'll pay a lot less tuition. Tuition's money you pay to learn something that's very expensive. And exactly, there are several, as you heard on this podcast, there are several considerations when deploying the strategy. And this special sauce of teaching tax flow is that we help people in our community implement a strategy. We tell them about it and we help them implement it. So thanks Arda and John, and I hope everyone jumps in with questions.
Even my dog's excited, if you can't hear him in the background. But yeah, Arda, definitely thank you for joining us here on this show and really, sharing your knowledge on this. Obviously, STRs, so short-term rentals, getting a little bit more popular in some areas and retracting a little bit from the others. So we look forward to having you back soon.
Yeah, great to be with you guys. Thank you again.
Absolutely. And as I always like to close it up here on the Teaching Tax Flow podcast, same time, technically, but a different week, same day of the week, different topic, back here on the Teaching Tax Flow podcast. Hey everybody, John here from the Teaching Tax Flow team. Thank you for joining us here on this episode as we looked at those STRs and STR loopholes with Chris and Arda. And of course, we make things as easy as we possibly can here. If you are interested in any more information on the STR loophole, or really just want to pick these guys' brain, you can actually go directly to strtax.guru. We've made it that simple for you. strtax.guru, Guru. You can literally fill out the form on there. It goes directly to these guys. They'll get back to you, and they love discussing this topic amongst many others. So take advantage of that. Take advantage of the private Facebook group, defeatingtaxes.com. We'll send you directly there. And as always, keep sending us the show topic information, guest info, anything that you guys want to hear on the podcast. That's what we're here for. So until next time, we'll see you very soon.
The content provided is for educational purposes only. We encourage you to seek personalized investment advice from your financial professional. For all tax and legal advice, please consult your CPA or attorney. Investment advisory services are offered through Cabin Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Securities are offered through Cabin Securities, a registered broker-dealer. The content of this podcast does not constitute an offer of securities. Offerings can only be made through an offering memorandum, and you should carefully examine the risk factors and other information contained in the memorandum.